They called it the Widow's Kingdom, a land draped in silence where the laughter of men had faded like smoke in the wind. Travelers whispered of villages where only women walked, their faces etched with loss, their sons buried before their beards had grown. This was no myth. Once, the kingdom of Virelia brimmed with warriors, merchants, fathers and sons. But now, the clang of swords was gone, replaced by the hollow echo of empty halls. It began with war, grand armies marching into the east, banners snapping under a crimson dawn. None returned, letters stopped coming, graves swallowed names. Then came the plague. The few men who crawled home brought death in their lungs, and the land wept again. Now, in market squares, women bartered with quiet voices. In churches, they prayed not for victory, but for men, for husbands, for a future. And deep in the palace, a queen stared at a map, her trembling finger tracing borders that had grown hungry for her undefended lands. In Virelia's gilded halls, desperation turned to strategy. Marriage had always been a game of alliances, but now it was war without swords. With so few men left, every male heir became a prize worth kingdoms. The palace buzzed with whispers of auctions disguised as banquets. Noble women, draped in velvet, paraded before boys barely grown. Dowries swelled beyond reason, gold, land, titles, all for a single union that could promise a child. Queens of neighboring realms dangled their sons like bait, demanding treaties, fortresses and trade in exchange for a wedding bed. The queen clenched her jaw. She would not bend, but with each empty cradle, her power cracked like glass. In the markets, common women fought their own war. Matches were bartered like grain, and coins changed hands for the promise of a husband. Love was gone, calculation ruled. A kiss became currency, a womb a weapon. And in the shadows, some refused the game altogether. Women who vowed never to kneel, never to breed for politics. Their whispers spoke of rebellion. The queen stood before the council, her crown heavy as a millstone. The realm was crumbling, its fields barren, its coffers hollow, its bloodline dying. She had wept for her husband, for her brothers, for her people. Now, she would not weep, she would rule. The decree was carved into law. Every woman of age shall bear a child within 3 years, or forfeit her land. The kingdom gasped. Marriage became a mandate. Love, a luxury. Noble daughters were paired like horses at auction, their names inked on parchments sealed in red wax. Farmers' widows were promised to boys barely past childhood. Some cheered the law as salvation. Others spat upon it, calling it tyranny. The queen's hand did not tremble. Virelia will live, she vowed, even if the price was freedom. But still, there were not enough men. Whispers curled through the palace like smoke. Bring them from beyond our borders. The queen crushed her goblet and swore, never. Yet in her heart, doubt bloomed like rot. Just when hope flickered like a dying candle, fate struck again. From the east came not soldiers, but sickness. It traveled with the few broken men who limped home, their armor rusted, their eyes hollow. They carried no banners, only death in their breath. The plague crept through Virelia like a shadow at dusk. First the inns, then the churches, then the farms. Men were the easiest prey, weak from war, wounds festering. Within weeks, the handful who had survived the sword fell to the sickness. Funeral bells tolled until their ropes frayed. The graveyards overflowed, bodies burned in pyres that stained the sky black. Mothers who had buried sons now buried husbands. Sisters wept until their voices cracked like dry wood. When the plague's hunger finally ebbed, Virelia stood hollow. Entire villages had no men left. Boys barely 12 were treated as treasures, locked away like royal jewels, lest death snatch them too. And in the palace, the queen's face hardened. War had broken her heart, plague had broken her kingdom, but she swore, Virelia will not die. Years later, the eastern plains still whispered of ghosts. Where banners once billowed, there was only wind. The battlefield of Carthaven lay untouched, a graveyard without tombstones, where the bones of Virelia's sons mingled with foreign steel. No birds sang there, no flowers dared bloom. The earth itself seemed cursed, drinking blood until it soured. Travelers spoke of armor half buried in mud, swords rusting in skeletal hands, helmets cradling shattered skulls. The widows called it the Silent Sea. They came sometimes, draped in black, to kneel in the endless grass. No names, no markers, only silence, heavy as a mountain. It was here the truth carved itself into stone. The men of Virelia were never coming home. The war had eaten them whole, and the bones that lay beneath that soil were all that remained of a kingdom's strength. And yet, the widows rose from their grief with steel in their eyes. If no men would fight for Virelia, then women would. The streets of Virelia became a sea of black veils. Women filled the markets, the fields, even the taverns once reserved for men. Silence clung to every corner. Laughter had died with the husbands who once echoed through these walls. They called themselves the Sisterhood of Sorrow. Thousands of widows, young and old, bound by loss. Some clutched wedding rings like relics of a dead faith. Others wandered the roads, searching for men who would never return. The nobles' halls fared no better. Daughters of great houses sat in empty chambers, embroidery in hand, while their fathers rotted on distant battlefields. Even the queen mourned, not for one man, but for a kingdom of them. Children grew fatherless, their tiny hands tugging at skirts instead of strong arms. Girls learned to plow fields, mend roofs, wield hammers, and in secret, some learned to wield swords. But grief soon gave way to hunger. Crops withered without strong backs to tend them. Taxes went unpaid. Bandits roamed freely, for no man guarded the roads. Virelia was not just broken, it was bleeding, and the world was watching. It began with a trumpet blast, a call to glory that echoed across Virelia's hills. The king promised victory, wealth, and honor. "Our sons will return as heroes," he declared from the balcony, his golden crown glinting in the sun. And so they marched, thousands of men, young and old, clad in steel and hope. Mothers wept at the gates, wives kissed lips they would never touch again. The drums pounded like the heartbeat of the realm. But the war dragged on. Letters grew fewer, and when they came, they dripped with blood and despair. Winter devoured armies faster than swords. Whole battalions vanished into snowbound graves. Years passed. Messengers stopped riding. The Eastern Front became a graveyard, its soil fattened with bones. Then came the last, dreaded news. The king has fallen. The roads home stayed empty. The songs of triumph never came. And back in Virelia, the cradle fires dimmed and silence spread like frost. The kingdom had traded its men for a dream and received nothing but ghosts. When law, love, and diplomacy failed, Virelia turned to something older, violence. But this time, it was not men who bore the blades. The call went out. Every woman who can lift a sword, take one. From farmsteads to noble halls, they answered. Blacksmiths forged lighter steel for smaller hands. Mothers strapped armor over their mourning gowns. Daughters learned to strike before they could braid their hair. They trained in the courtyards, their cries shattering the silence of grief. At first they stumbled, swords too heavy, shields too wide. But rage is a teacher like no other. Soon, they moved like storms, swift and merciless. The queen herself rode at their head, her golden crown replaced with a helm of iron. No longer a ruler of tears, she was Virelia's blade. The wolves who once preyed on her kingdom began to whisper in fear. They called them the Widow Guard, and when they rode, the ground trembled, not from numbers, but from fury. The years that followed carved Virelia into legend. No longer the helpless widow's realm, it became the land of ironclad women, feared and revered across the continent. Yet even strength could not stop time. The bloodline thinned like smoke in wind, children were few, and men fewer still. The queen, once radiant, aged into steel and shadows. She bore no heir, neither did most of her warriors, who had traded cradles for swords. One winter's night, beneath a sky littered with cold stars, the queen summoned her council. Her voice was iron. If Virelia is to die, it will not be forgotten. And so she commanded the kingdom's chronicles written in gold, of the men who marched, the widows who rose, the warriors who defied fate. When the queen fell, the throne stood empty. Some say Virelia vanished into foreign soil. Others claim its daughters scattered, carrying their strength into new bloodlines, shaping empires yet to come. But in the ruins they found one thing etched into stone. Here lived the kingdom that needed no kings. As Virelia withered, whispers carried through its borders. Neighboring realms heard the truth. A kingdom without men. Merchants began arriving in droves. Traders from the south, mercenaries from the north, priests from distant shores. They brought grain, steel, and temptation. For the widows of Virelia, these strangers were dangerous dreams. A touch of a foreign hand, a smile at the market, a promise murmured in another tongue. Love was no longer a matter of choice, it was survival. Children meant life. But the Queen's decree thundered through the land. No foreign seed shall take root in Virelia's soil. To some, it was law, to others, a challenge. Secret trysts bloomed in shadowed barns by riverbanks under starlight. A kiss could cost a woman her home, her name, even her life. And yet in a kingdom gasping for heirs, desire was stronger than fear. Rumors swirled of bastards born in silence, children with foreign eyes, hidden from the throne's wrath. The Queen called it treason. The widows called it hope. Weakness smells like blood in the wild, and Virelia reeked of it. When news of its vanished men reached the mountains and plains, wolves came in human form. Raiders struck first, swift and merciless. They torched granaries, stole livestock, and dragged screaming women into the night. The Queen's soldiers were too few, grey-haired men and beardless boys. They fought with desperation, not strength. Some victories came, but at a cruel price. The last of Virelia's men fell on those battlefields, their blood soaking soil that could no longer bear wheat. Then came the reprisals. Virelian women armed themselves with sickles, kitchen knives, and hunting spears. They set traps in the forests, poisoned wells, and turned their homes into fortresses of fury. The raiders laughed until the widows began hanging their severed heads on pikes. Yet every victory tasted bitter. For each raider slain, 2 women were taken. The kingdom was not only dying, it was being devoured. And in the palace, the Queen gripped her sword, her silks stained with blood. If the wolves wanted a feast, she swore, they would choke on the bones.